How do you build an empire that's meant to last 1,000 years? Well, the Nazis knew it wasn't just about controlling the present. You have to own the future. And to do that, they launched one of the most systematic campaigns ever to capture and shape the minds of an entire generation. So let's dive in and see just how deep this system of total control really went. Wow, just listen to that for a second. This wasn't some empty threat from a high-ranking official. No, this was the actual blueprint. It shows you the sheer scale of their ambition. A lifelong indoctrination program, a cradle-to-grave system designed to forge absolute, unquestioning loyalty. So this all comes down to one core fanatical belief. In Hitler's worldview, children weren't really individuals. They were raw material. They were the clay that he would mold to build his future empire. And the logic, from his perspective, was brutally simple, right? If you want to control Germany's destiny, you first have to control its children. And this wasn't just about changing a few lessons in a textbook. Oh no, the plan was much bigger. The goal was to create a future army, for sure, but also to raise a generation of absolute true believers. And the only way to do that? Total immersion. Seizing control of every single part of a kid's life, in the classroom and out, to forge an entire society in the party's image. Okay, so the first front in this war for the mind was, of course, the school. The Nazis immediately started what they called cleansing and purifying the whole education system. But what that really meant was transforming schools from places of learning into factories for indoctrination. And the process was just chillingly methodical. Step 1, get rid of the teachers. Anyone Jewish or anyone who just seemed politically unreliable was fired. Gone. Step 2, separate the kids. An instant wall went up. German kids were forbidden from even sitting next to or playing with Jewish kids. And then Step 3, the final, horrifying step, the outright expulsion of anyone deemed an undesirable. And for so many of those kids, this wasn't just the end of their schooling. It was the beginning of a path that led straight to the gas chambers. So, now you've got a classroom with only the right teachers and the right students. The next step? You change everything they learn. Every single textbook got a complete rewrite. And I don't just mean history. I mean everything. It was about weaponizing every single subject to serve the Nazi worldview. And the brainwashing went incredibly deep. They literally invented a new subject, racial science, just to push the idea of Aryan superiority. Imagine being a kid and even your math problems are twisted to include hateful stereotypes. The whole point of school basically boiled down to 3 things: be loyal to the state, worship Hitler, and hate his enemies. Even sports got warped. Boxing wasn't for fun. It was training to make boys iron-hearted and ready for violence. But of course, the control didn't stop when the school bell rang. In fact, that's when it really ramped up. The Nazis understood that if you truly want to own someone's mind, you have to dominate their free time, their friendships, their entire world outside the classroom. For boys, life was basically mapped out on this inescapable conveyor belt. At 10 years old, boom, you were in the Jungvolk, the junior group. At 14, you graduated to the Hitler Youth for intense military and ideological training. At 18, it was the labor service. And from there, it was a one-way ticket straight into the army. There was no other path, no off-ramp. And just think about the incredible power of this oath, sworn by 14-year-old kids. They weren't pledging allegiance to Germany or to some abstract ideal. They were swearing to give up all their energy, their strength, their very lives for one single man. That creates a profound, personal, and absolute bond of loyalty. And to make sure this whole system was airtight, they just eliminated all the competition. Church groups, scouting clubs, any other independent youth organization, they were all systematically shut down and banned. The Hitler Youth wasn't an option, it was the only option, a total monopoly on a young person's mind. So that's the track for boys. But what about the other half of the population? Well, for girls, the indoctrination followed a parallel but very, very different path. Their role wasn't to be a fighter for the Reich, it was to be a mother for the Reich. The gender roles were just completely rigid and absolute. Boys were molded into these aggressive, steel-hearted soldiers. Girls, on the other hand, were taught that their highest possible achievement was to become a good mother. Their whole duty was to produce the next generation of pure-blooded Aryan children for the state. And the state didn't just tell them this. They actively incentivized it. They basically turned childbirth into a national sport, complete with medals just like soldiers get in battle.
The Honor Cross of the German Mother came in bronze for 4 kids, silver for 6, and gold for having 8 or more. The message was unmistakable. Your womb is a weapon for the state.
But this cult of motherhood had a really dark side. For women who didn't follow the rules, the punishment was severe and very public. Aryan women who had relationships with Jews or Poles or other undesirables faced these horrific public humiliations. They'd have their heads shaved, get paraded through the streets with signs detailing their crime, not to mention jail time, and losing all their rights and their families.
So, you've got the schools and the youth groups. What's the final piece of the puzzle that holds this whole thing together? Propaganda. The goal was to make sure all those lessons really stuck, so they saturated the entire environment, posters, radio, movies, you name it, with non-stop Nazi ideology.
One of the most chilling tools they used was deceptive language. In official documents, the Nazis almost never used direct words like kill or murder. Instead, they used these creepy bureaucratic euphemisms. Mass killing became special treatment, or the final solution. Sending people to gas chambers was just called an evacuation. It was a way to sanitize the atrocities, to make the unthinkable sound normal.
And then there was the outright dehumanization. This was absolutely crucial to their plan. Propaganda films and posters consistently portrayed Jewish people not as human beings, but as vermin, as rats or pests. You can see the terrible logic here, right? If you can convince an entire population that a certain group of people isn't really human, it becomes a lot easier to justify persecuting them and, eventually, murdering them.
And this propaganda was incredibly sophisticated. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all message. No, they tailored it to appeal to the specific hopes and fears of every single group. It was like a targeted ad campaign from hell. For kids, Hitler was your savior. For workers, he was the guy who'd get you a job. For women, he was the protector of the race. It created this powerful, unified message that seemed to have an answer for everybody.
So when you put it all together, the purged schools, the mandatory youth groups, the rigid gender roles, and the constant, inescapable propaganda, you can see the whole machine. It was this massive ideological funnel that left zero room for independent thought, channeling an entire generation toward one single, totalitarian way of seeing the world.
And this really brings us to a final, vital question for all of us. When you understand how a system like this was built, it forces you to ask, what are the safeguards? How can critical thinking, how can a real education, one that teaches you how to think, not just what to think, serve as a firewall against this kind of total ideological control? It's a question worth reflecting on, not just about the past, but for today.